again for Thank you again for having us. My name is Raymond. I'm an advocate with Disability Rights California, and our presenter today is one of our senior attorneys, Maria Uriarte. So it's a quick overview of who we are in case this is the first time you're hearing about us. Disability Rights California, we are a statewide nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with any disability related issues. So we have attorneys and advocates that can handle different issues such as access or discrimination with housing, with transportation, with education, which includes special education and higher education. We can also help with some employment reasonable accommodation issues. We can help with public health benefits such as Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, Social Security overpayment issue that relates to work. And within our agency, we also have different programs. Examples are our Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. This specializes in helping clients of the regional center, and our Client Assistance Program, or CAP. They specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehabilitation. Um, our phone number is in the chat. If you like to speak to one of our advocates one-on-one in a more private setting about your particular situation, you can give us a call. Our number is 800-776-5746. And our phones are open Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. If you call us outside of those hours, you can leave us a message and we'll get back in touch with you as soon as possible. And everything you see today, the materials, along with any website links that might be shared in the chat, you will get it after the presentation. So without further ado, Maria, take it away.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you, Flavia, for inviting us today to talk about regional center services. So if you've ever heard the phrase the Lanterman Act, some of you might wonder, well, what in the world is that? Well, it's the set of codes. Codes are synonymous with statutes, with the law. All those three words are synonymous, that make up the world of regional centers, right? So if you want to see what the law is on the world of regional centers, you would go to Welfare and Institutions Code, beginning section 4400 through 4906, and there's some supplemental codes too. So this is where you find the law. And why do they call it the Lanterman Act? This set of codes is called the Lanterman Act because it was these laws were proposed by Assembly Member Frank D. Lanterman, and these laws were passed in 1977. Now, he was not the only one to do this. There were a lot of people who were instrumental in getting this law passed, but it was named after him, so the Lanterman Act. And codes come with regulations. And if you want to know what the regulations are for everything regional center, you would go to the California Code of Regulations, starting with Title 17. And the regulations actually implement the laws. The law may be very short, but how do you implement the law? Well, the regulations will tell you. So whenever you're looking at the law, you should also be looking at the corresponding regulations. And all of the links here take you to the law and the laws and the regulations. Why am I telling you this? Because you're either a consumer or you know of a consumer, and being a regional center consumer is typically a lifelong thing. So you might as well learn what your rights are, and those rights are contained in the laws, the regulations. An easier way to do it is to review our manual on our website called Rights Under the Lanterman Act, and you'll find a lot of information on your rights and what the laws and regulations say about things. So Today we're talking about services and supports, and the law, section 4501 of the WIC code says that services and supports are to approximate the pattern of everyday living available to people without a disability of the same age. And that consumers, we call consumers clients of the regional center, can ask for any service or support to lessen the effects of the developmental disability, to have an independent, productive, and normal life, and to learn new skills. Why am I telling you all of this? Because you may have to remind the service coordinator what the law says when you're asking for services. Now, the regional centers have priorities under the law. One is safety, to make sure that the consumer gets the services that they need to keep them safe. Community access, services and support so that consumers can access and participate in the community just like people without disabilities, and remaining at home. So what services will allow the person to live in their preferred living situation? And of course, for children, the priority is always to be with family. What services do regional centers offer? I'm going to disappoint you right now. There is no list, because the law says that regional centers can provide virtually any service if there's an established need. That's Welfare and Institutions Code section 4501. Now, Welfare and Institutions Code section 4512B, and I'm going to open that up, does talk about what kinds of services are available, but you're going to see some language there. And that language is important. So we're in section 4512 of the Wealth and Institutions Code. We're going to go to small b. So we've got A, and we have to go all the way down to find B. And around the middle, almost the middle of the paragraph, it says, services and supports listed in the IPP may include, but are not limited to, diagnosis, evaluation, treatment, personal care, daycare, special living arrangements. And it goes on to list a bunch of services. But I think that what's important here in the law is that it says may include, but are not limited to. So this is what you see here as far as the list of services is only some of them. It's not the exhaustive list of services. So the list does not exist. I just made that one up. So the list does not exist. Remember. And so that's the first myth we have to dispel. However, there are ways of finding out what kinds of services are out there. Every regional center has a vendor list, and that vendor list has the name of the vendor, the contact information, the type of services that's offered. And there's an example here from the Regional Center of Orange County, and the list goes on and on and on. So, for example, if I'm looking for a particular service, I can look at the vendor list to see if there are vendors there that are vendored with the regional center, and call that vendor up and say, hey, this is my situation. Is this a service you can provide for me? It just gives you an idea of what is out there. Now, just because your service is not on the vendor list doesn't mean that the regional center doesn't have to give it to you. A vendor list are just those vendors who are currently contracted with the regional center to provide services. There's a list of services, DDS. If you go to their website, there's a list of some services, and it describes the service. It gives a definition. Well, I can show it to you. But again, it's not the list because it doesn't exist. But if we go down here and we go to English, and by the way, it was in Chinese too, but so these are just some of the services that the regional center provides: adult day centers, programs, and it gives a description. and it's available to adults. You see, it's not available in the Early Start program from 0 to 3 or for children. And so you can just scroll down and kind of get an idea of the kinds of services the regional center can provide. I think, I think a lot of people get hung up with, I need to know what the name of the service is. I don't think that that's the key to getting a service. The key is to explain what you observe in the person. If it's a child, what are you concerned about? Talk to the service coordinator about what you're concerned about, and let the coordinator come up with the name of the service, right? Um, so don't worry so much that you don't know what the name of a particular service is. Better yet, describe what it is you're seeing or not seeing so that you can have a conversation with the service coordinator and come up with a service that will meet the need. This is our manual in case you're interested, and we have chapter 6 that talks about some of the services that keeps families together, so you can go there. Okay. Some more recent services, camp and social recreation is not so recent, but it was restored. And so there's information here. We've got 2 links about camping and social recreation. A newer service is called Coordinated Family Support. So you'll want to go ahead and look at these here. But if you go on your regional center website, you might find, a list of services. But remember, it's not the complete list because it doesn't exist. And so that's a way of trying to figure out the service. When you are getting ready for your IPP, and that's when you're going to talk about services, this is the formula that you should be able to answer. And I think, if anything, this is probably one of the most important slides in this presentation. Because to get a service, you have to establish a need. What's the need? Not the want, what's the need? Is the need related to the disability? Does the service meet an IPP goal? Because if there's no goal in your IPP, you're not going to get the service. And if there's no goal in the IPP, then you're going to need to call an IPP meeting and get that goal into the IPP so then you can ask for the service. You have to make sure that that service that you're asking for is not available through a generic resource, and I'm going to talk about that, or not available through a national support, talk about that too, and is the least costly alternative. So you have to answer these questions when you prepare to ask for a service. Now, you may do a great job in all of this and still the service is denied. Well, then you know what? You're just going to have to go to hearing. And um, we some recent statistics on going to hearing, especially because to go to hearing, you can ask for an informal conference, you can ask for mediation. And surprisingly, a lot of matters are resolved either before the informal hearing meeting or at the informal meeting. So it's if you're denied a service, it's a good idea to appeal, ask for an informal conference, ask for mediation, because it may resolve along the way and you may not need to go to a hearing. Generic resources are any public agency that can provide the service you're asking the regional center for. So if I have Medi-Cal and private insurance, health insurance, and I go to my service coordinator and I said, I want a power wheelchair, I need a power wheelchair. He's going to say to me, Maria, you've got private insurance and you've got Medi-Cal and you've got to exhaust those generic resources before you come to us and ask us for that. True. because the regional center is payer of last resort. So you're going to have to address the generic resources issue. And what are some of those generic resources? It could be Medi-Cal, Medicare, and home supported services, Department of Rehab, school districts, private or insurance, other health insurance. And there's a link here to a DDS information about generic resources that you may want to look at. And also important, and a lot of people don't know that, is that the law says that there shall be, and it's not there shouldn't be, it's there shall be no gaps in service. So the regional center can provide what is called gap funding, and it could pay for the services that you need while you're pursuing that service from your generic resource. But you need to show that that you need the service and that the delay in services will harm you. So if I need a chair, a wheelchair, and they say and my service coordinator says to me, Maria, you have to go to get it from Medi-Cal and your private insurance, and then come to us when they, with a letter of denial. But I say to them, look, I can't get around. I can't leave the house. I can't go into the community. I can't go grocery shopping. I can't, go to my doctor's. That can harm me. And so you're going to have to provide, a wheelchair in the meantime through gap funding while I pursue it through my generic resources. So really important concept. What are natural supports? So you're going to have to show that natural supports are not available. Natural supports are people who are in your life, family, friends, who are able to help you to meet your needs for free, to provide those services in the IPP for free. Now, as an adult, even if you live with your family is not responsible for you. So sometimes the regional centers want to say, oh, you adult, because you live with your family, they're your natural support. And you're going to say, oh, no, they're not. They have no responsibility to take care of me, and they're not available. So no natural support. But when we're talking about minors, there's an expectation that families are going to use the same resources they would use for typically developing children to support their child with a disability. So more so with minors, the service coordinator is going to explore the child's natural supports, who are able and willing to provide some of those services in the IPP for free. So the service coordinator may say, oh, well, the parents in the home, well, wait a minute, not available. Parents in the home during the day, but parent works, or parents sick, disabled, can't do it. So that's natural supports. And finally, least costly alternative. Of course, the regional center, it has to mind the pennies. And so, they are going to approve services from the least costly provider that can meet your needs. So that is really important, that can meet your needs. They may offer the least costly provider, but that provider may not meet your specific needs. And the law does say that a consumer is not required to use the least costly provider if it's going to result in the consumer moving from an existing provider of services to a more restrictive or less integrated services or supports. So that's really important too. Okay, now there are services in your IPP and the coordinator saying, I can't find any vendors, so can't give you the service. That is not an excuse. If that's happening to you, remember the IPP is a contract, and what is in the IPP, whatever services have been agreed to, have to be provided. So that if your service coordinator says, we can't find any vendors, well, you know what? I'm filing a 4731 complaint because you're violating my rights, my right to receive these services that are in the IPP. We'll see how fast they move, right, to find that vendor. Because regional centers have options for finding vendors. They can look for vendors, send out requests for proposals. You can use vendors from other regional centers. That's called courtesy vendoring. They can, they or you can approach a vendor that provides a similar service to see if they would provide the service that you need, looking at the vendor list. And the regional centers can ask DDS for funds to develop a new program of services and supports. That's what the law says. So when the regional center coordinator says we can't find any vendors, well, that's not an excuse not for not giving you services. Okay, so let's talk about purchase of service policies, because when you're asking for services, you also have to look at the purchase of service policies for your regional center. Um, they explain the requirements for receiving services that are in the purchase of service document. Usually they describe the service, the criteria. Sometimes they set limits on the service. The purchase of service policies vary from regional center to regional center, but no matter what, the purchase of service policy is for the service. There's always an exception. And you need to establish a disability related need for that exception. And so regional centers have to post their purchase of service policies online, their guidelines. The law says that with respect to transportation, personal assistance, independent or supported living services. But if you look at the purchase of service policies for regional centers, they include more than just these. They do include more than just these services. So you guys are East Bay, what is your regional center, East Bay?
GGRC.
GGRC. Okay,
Yes.
so let's go to the GGRC website. Where is my Google? Oh, I had it. Hold on a minute. I need to. So, Raymond or Lonnie, can you go to the GGRC Regional Center website and we'll look for the purchase of service policies for GGRC? Give us a moment. Sometimes in the old days, it was really hard sometimes to find them. But more and more, I'm seeing them under a section that's called transparency. And we'll see if it's there. Oh, yeah. So let's go to transparency up above there in the yellow. Yeah, let's go there. And let's go at policies. So there's one called policies. So we'll go there and see if it's there. Purchase of service guidelines, POS, and second column towards the middle, it says POS guidelines. Right there. So whenever you're thinking about a service, go to the purchase service guidelines to see if the service is here. And then if it is, you have to read about it. So your purchase of service guidelines has services, residential services, day programs, transportation, therapeutic, basic health care, training, independent and productive lives training, and that's about it. That's interesting that I don't see respite here. Can you just, yeah. So let's go one back. Let's go one back because it's not, usually respite is here. I'm just curious why it's not, but let's go back to the last one. Yeah. And then let's see, respite guide. Okay, so they have here, what they've done is they have purchase of service guidelines, but then they have different guidelines separated. So we've got the respite policy. So you're going to want to read, if you're going to ask for respite, you've got to read about it, right? And see how it's determined through that regional center. So Yeah. Thank you. So thank you. So now you know where to look for your regional center purchase of service guidelines. Um, and
Sorry,
but
Maria,
remember,
we
uh-huh.
have here in the chat if you can slow down a bit.
Okay, sure. Sorry
Thank you.
about that. Okay. So I'm gonna go, am I sharing? Let me make sure I'm sharing there we go. I included one for North LA Regional Center, but you can see theirs very different from yours. Okay, so enough about purchase of service policies. I want to talk a little bit about the IPP because it's through the IPP process that you get services. And so you need to know about the IPP process. So your IPP is going to list all of the services and supports that you're going to get. It must be held every 3 years, but usually it's held every year. But you can call an IPP anytime, as many times as you need. Okay. It's not that, you only get one chance a year to ask for services and supports or to change services and supports. It's whenever you need to. And when you ask for an IPP, it must be held within 30 days of your request. You have to have that IPP meeting. If on day 31 you still don't have that IPP meeting, you haven't heard from the regional center service coordinator, you know what? You can file a 4731 complaint because they have violated the consumer's rights because the law says that the IPP must be held within 30 days of your request. And of course, the IPP itself, the document is person centered, right? Based on what the person wants. Next slide. Oh, I'm doing it. Hold on. So the law says that when you're talking about services and supports, you have to look at the needs and preferences of the consumer, right? The need to consider the service options proposed by the IPP team, how effective those options are in meeting the IPP goals and cost effectiveness of each option have to be considered. And another section of the law, section 4646, says that exactly that the intent of the legislature is to ensure that the IPP and provision of services and supports by the regional center system is centered on the individual, takes into account the needs and preferences of the individual and the family, if appropriate, right? Sometimes what the family wants and for an adult consumer is not what the adult consumer wants. And that becomes a problem, doesn't it? Sometimes. So it's also the intent of the legislature to promote community integration, independent, productive, and normal lives, and stable and healthy environments. Important language. Section 4648 says, the intent of the legislature with regard to services and supports is to assist people to achieve the greatest self-sufficiency possible and to exercise personal choices. And that the IPP planning team shall give highest preference to those services and supports that would allow minors with developmental disabilities to live with their families, adult persons with IDD to live as independently as possible in the community, and to allow all consumers to interact with persons without disabilities in positive and meaningful ways. So, also really important language. The IPP will identify hopes, plans, goals that are specific, should be specific, attainable, relevant, and time limited. And also, how are those goals going to be? How are you going to measure whether the person is going to reach the goal? How often will you revisit what's going on to see if that's happening? Who's going to be responsible for what? And when will each service be provided? I do need to tell you that starting this year, DDS, it's indicated to all regional centers that they need to use a new IPP template. This is this was issued in August 15th of 2024. Can you see what I'm showing you? I just want to make sure I'm showing you the DDS website. Can you see it, Lonnie?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And it says here that if the new IPP template, it will begin to be used January 1st of 2025. And there's even a video on how to use it. And so we can go here. That will take us to information, the person-centered IPP video, public meetings and trainings, your plan, your child's plan, youth's plan, sample forms. So we have person-centered, person first form for the IPP, third person if the form is in the third person IPP form, and the IPP agreement. So these are forms that should be used, or the regional center should have started using in January of this year. I've heard some are using, some are not. But I think that if your regional center, when you go to that IPP and you're going to talk about services, you've got to ask, where's that form that you're supposed to be providing. And it's a template form, and I don't see English. Why am I not seeing English? I'm seeing it in the other languages that are available, but I
It's the
can't.
first one that says IPP full.
That
First
one
person,
there?
yes, that's
Oh,
the
I see.
English.
It's coming up. It's coming up in another. Okay, I see. So this is the template, and it says, the individual program plan, introduction, things people should know about me, etc., how this plan was developed, communication. So I'm not going to go through it because this is not a training on IPP, but it's for you to look at. Now I don't even know how to get back to. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to go back to here, share that. And that's the form. And then the agreement and signature page is here. And so the agreements, it says what, so service or support, what service or support, supported by, who's going to do it, when's the start date, when's the end date, how much, how often. So these are the templates that the regional centers are supposed to be using. And if they're not using, just say, well, then we're going to use the format, because they're supposed to be using the form, these forms. I just wanted to let you know that that's what should be happening, because like I said, you get your services through the IPP. And we did a training on services, and there was someone who was listening to the training who said that her regional center, and I don't remember which one it was, used the template, and she found it to be really helpful. So I invite you to open up these links and go and look at them. Things to remember before your IPP: make sure that you can record your IPP, but you have to give at least 24-hour notice in writing that you're going to record the IPP. Bring someone to take notes, because there's too much going on for you to take notes about what's going on. So, because you're trying to listen and understand what they're saying, you're trying to formulate your response in all of that. It's really hard to take notes. You also need to make sure that there's a decision maker at the IPP, because the law says that the IPP meeting should include a decision maker. And if there's no one present to make decisions, then you can continue the IPP meeting, and the regional center has to have another meeting within 15 days of that first meeting. Of course, unless you agree to extend the deadline. Because the law says, sometimes they'll say, well, we don't have the person to make a decision. We're going to have to, round table this and come back. That's not the way the law is written. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at some of the services that are out there. Respite. The whole purpose of respite is to give the person who's the main caregivers a break so that they can go and rest, meet with friends, go shopping, go to the movies, take a class, whatever it is. There's in-home respite where someone comes to the home. There's also out-of-home respite where the consumer goes to a residential facility and they take care of the consumer there. And so I've heard of out-of-home respite being used when the family wants to take a vacation and the consumer can't go. So they coordinate with the service coordinator, out-of-home respite. The other way I've heard used, and they're not the only two ways, is a parent who has to take care of her son, very involved medically, very difficult, Monday through Friday. And he goes to a residential facility on the weekends so that mom can get a break. So that's out-of-home respite. Who's eligible? Well, the consumer has to live with the family member who's taking care of the consumer. The IPP team agrees that there's a need for respite. There's an objective, a goal in the IPP for this. And you also have to show that the consumer, it says here client, but consumer, same thing, requires more care and supervision than a person of the same age who does not have a developmental disability. And that is probably very easy to show when you start talking about all of the care that the person needs. That someone his or her age who doesn't have a disability wouldn't have. There used to be a limit on respite hours for in-home respite. You couldn't get more than 90 hours in a 3-month period or 30 a month. And you couldn't be in out-of-home respite for more than 21 days. You couldn't be. That all went away in January of 2018. And respite should be provided based on the needs. So there isn't a cap on hours, whether it be in-home respite or not. And there's sometimes you can get a respite where someone who's qualified to provide healthcare can come and do that kind of respite. But I just want to say that I haven't looked at it lately, but I've seen purchase of service policies for respite where they have the limits of 90 days, 90 hours or 21 for out of home. And that's completely wrong because respite is determined on a case-by-case basis. The other thing about respite is that sometimes the regional centers will say, well, you're getting IHSS. You don't need respite. They're using IHSS as a generic resource for respite. They're two very different services. IHSS, someone is providing the service. Respite is to give the person who's providing the main care a break. So they can't, that's not correct to say that we won't give you respite or a little respite because you're getting IHSS, two very different things, but they do it sometimes. With regard to behavioral services, ABA.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? Explain the IHSS and the GGRC respite again. Can you repeat what you said?
I didn't talk about GGRC respite. I'm just talking about respite generally. And what I'm saying is that some regional centers, when you ask for respite, they'll say, but you're getting IHSS, so you're not entitled to respite. That's wrong because IHSS and respite are two different services. They're treating IHSS as if it were a generic resource. And it's not a generic resource for respite because they're two different services. That's what I said.
Thank you.
When we're talking about behavioral services, ABA, if you have Medi-Cal and you're in part of a Medi-Cal managed care plan, you're going to get your ABA services from your Medi-Cal managed care plan. If you have fee-for-service Medi-Cal, where you can go to any Medi-Cal provider in the state, and very few people are in fee-for-service Medi-Cal. The majority of people who have Medi-Cal are in a managed care plan. Excuse me. So if you have fee-for-service Medi-Cal, hold on a minute, I need to. Then you ask for ABA through the regional center. They administer the program. But it's actually paid for by Medi-Cal. So that's how you get ABA. Independent living. So we've got something called independent living services. When a consumer turns 18, this service is available, and it teaches the person how to live independently in the community. So it teaches the consumer how to cook, clean, take care of him or herself, manage money, navigate the community, transportation. More information about that is in this link. Then there's something called supported living services. It's for people who want to live independently. And, but you have to be able to pay your rent. So let's say that I'm a consumer of the regional center and I've been living with my parents forever, and now I want to live independently. So I can talk to the service coordinator about independent supported living services. I have to be able to pay my rent wherever I go. I can have roommates. I don't have to live alone, but I'm independent of my family. And so if that's possible, then the regional center will provide the services and supports that I'm going to need to be able to live independently in the community. More information on that is in this link. Different living options, you know, if we go to this website, if you want to know what the different living options are for consumers of regional center, we've got all kinds of living options, right? Aside from living with your family or friends, you know, there are other options here. Community participation, work and day activities. So there's a very important concept in the law that says that services and supports must be provided in the least restrictive environment, that consumers have the right to services and supports close to their home community and live in places the same as people without disabilities, and that it's important for regional centers to provide opportunities for consumers to be integrated into the mainstream life of their communities. So as far as work options, there's something called competitive integrated employment, where you work along with people without disabilities and you earn a minimum wage at least. And you are entitled to the same promotional opportunities and everything else that people without disabilities have. So that's competitive integrated employment. The other type of employment is self-employment, supported employment. where you work, but you have services and supports in place that allow you to work. So maybe where you work, you'll have a coach with you or someone who shadows you. There are all kinds of opportunities for that kind of work. There's even paid internship program where you can work in internship programs, and the regional center pays everything, pays the wages, pays all of the costs that the employer would normally have to pay. And there are limits as to how much you can work, but there's more information here on if you go to this link. There are day programs that provide services on an hourly or daily basis. There are not 24-hour programs. At a day program, consumers can learn how to interact with other people, participate in all kinds of activities. Developmental centers are that's really where people they live in like a developmental center where they can't get out of, right? That's where they live and everything. They're throughout the years they've been closing more and more of these, and I think there are maybe a couple of them left. There are activity centers, there are behavioral management programs and tailored day programs. Usually what happens when you have an adult consumer and you're trying to figure out, well, what does the week look like for this person? And the service coordinators will say, oh, let's just send them to a day program. But what if the consumer doesn't want to go to that day program? They can make up what they want to do during the week through tailored day programs. I don't want to go to a day program 5 days a week and be there most of the day. I want to go out into the community and do things. Well, that could be a tailored day program. Transition services are for special ed kids who turn who turn 16. There should be a transition planning meeting. What does that mean? What's going to happen to the student once the student exits the school system? Where does this student want to live? What does the student want to do with his or her life? Does the student want to work, go to school? What is it? And so that's through the transition planning meeting. And you can, if you're a consumer of the regional center, you can invite the regional center to the transition plan. The regional center provides services for transition age youth. If the student has a vocational goal, you can even invite the Department of Rehabilitation to a transition planning meeting, because the Department of Rehabilitation provides services to students too. We have a really good publication on transition services for students that you may want to look at. So there are restrictions on services the regional center can provide. So it says the law says that regional centers cannot purchase certain services for consumers if the consumer is between 18 and 22 and is still eligible for special education and related services and has not received a high school diploma. So the services that they cannot provide are the ones that are listed here. So day programs, vocational education, work services, but there's an exception to this. If the IPP determines that the needs cannot be met by the educational system, then yes, you can get those services. Or that the generic resource, which is pretty much as like the first one, does not meet your needs. But if you participate in employment, which includes paid internship, then the regional center does have to provide the services that are listed here. Okay, I've mentioned 4731 complaints a little bit in this presentation. When you're not getting the services that are in your IAPP, you're going to file a 4731 complaint. When the law has your rights. The law also sets timelines for regional centers to do things. And when the regional centers are not complying with those timelines, they've violated your rights. And therefore, you can file a 4731 complaint. In our chapter 10, it tells you how to do it. You're going to file it with the director of the regional center. And if you don't like the response of the regional center director, you can file a complaint directly with the executive director of DDS. For appeals, you're talking about when the regional center denies eligibility or wants to take away eligibility, when the regional center denies a service, reduces a service, or takes away a service. Those are the issues for appeals. And I do a whole training on appeals, but there've been changes to the appeals process, and you may want to look at this link for those changes. Good changes for the most part. Resources, our website, we've got a lot of materials, a lot of publications on our websites. Our manual is there. Here's the link to that manual. The Office of Clients' Rights Advocacy is our sister organization. They are there to advocate for regional center consumers. They are not employees of the regional center. So if you want to know who your client's rights advocate is, you can go to this, open up this link and find out who it is. If you want to try to get some assistance on a matter, you can call our intake line, which is right there at the bottom. If you're having trouble with your regional center, you can reach out to the Office of the Ombudsperson. This office is located within DDS. If you're in the self-determination program and you're having trouble with the regional center, you go to the section, the Ombudsperson for self-determination. So, and these links will take you into those for more information. Okay, we've come to the end of the presentation and we can take questions.